Billionaire witnesses Black Maid shielding his frail father. What follows stuns the mansion. One act of selfless kindness would forever change the dynamics of wealth and power within those opulent walls. The ripple effects of that moment would reveal secrets buried deeper than the mansion's foundations. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The storm outside the Carter mansion was nothing compared to the one raging inside its marble halls. Lightning illuminated the grand foyer in violent flashes, casting eerie shadows across the imported Italian marble. John Smith, the billionaire heir to the Carter fortune, had just returned home early from a business meeting, his footsteps silenced by the thunder of voices echoing down the corridor. The familiar walls that usually represented power and security now seemed to close in around him as he moved cautiously toward the commotion. "You ungrateful little nobody!" The shrill voice of his wife Jennifer cut through the air like a knife. John quickened his pace, his heart hammering against his ribs. At the heart of the chaos, Sarah Johnson, the young black maid, stood trembling but unyielding, her body forming a human shield protecting the frail form of Robert Smith. The elderly patriarch clung to her sleeve with bony fingers, his breath shallow and labored. His weathered face, once commanding during his years as an army captain, now appeared ashen and drawn, yet his eyes remained clear and fixed on the woman, who now threatened to tear the household apart. "Step aside," Jennifer demanded, her silk gown shimmering in the dim light of the hallway, diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured dramatically. "This isn't your place." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "Mr. Robert needs his rest, ma'am." The doctor was very clear about keeping him calm. John watched from the shadows, momentarily frozen by the scene unfolding before him. His father, once so strong and imposing, now depended on the protection of a maid against his own daughter-in-law. The young woman's shoulders were squared despite her trembling hands, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. "I won't ask again," Jennifer hissed, taking a menacing step forward. Robert's fingers tightened around Sarah's wrist. "Stay, please," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm outside. The maid nodded almost imperceptibly, planting her feet more firmly on the expensive carpet. Her loyalty to the elderly man was evident in every line of her body, a stark contrast to the fury radiating from Jennifer, whose perfectly manicured hand now reached for a crystal ornament on the nearby table. John stepped forward, finally breaking free from his shock. The movement caught Jennifer's attention, her expression shifting instantly from rage to calculated charm. But it was too late. He had seen enough to understand that something fundamental had fractured in his home, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jennifer Smith unleashed her fury with venomous words, her silk gown shimmering and diamonds flashing beneath the chandelier's cold light. The socialite's perfectly manicured fingers clutched the stem of her wineglass so tightly it threatened to snap. "You dare stand there like you matter?" she sneered, her voice a razor through the tension. "You're nothing but hired help, replaceable, forgettable." Each word was precisely aimed to wound, to diminish. Sarah's hands shook, but she didn't move from her protective stance in front of Robert. The young woman's uniform was crisp despite her 12-hour shift, her resolve stronger than her fear. She had promised herself, when she took this position, that she would care for the elderly patriarch properly, not just for the paycheck that helped with her mother's medical bills back in Detroit, but because it was right. "Step aside," Jennifer demanded, taking a threatening step forward. "My father-in-law doesn't need your pathetic coddling." Robert Smith's weathered hand reached out, gently touching Sarah's arm. "Steady, soldier," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm's rage outside. It was the same phrase he had used countless times during his days as an army captain, a mantra that had carried his men through impossible situations. Now, in his frailty, he offered it as armor to the only person in the mansion who treated him with genuine dignity. The words gave Sarah strength even as Jennifer's threats grew louder. The storm outside, rattling the windows in time with every cruel accusation. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the marble halls of the Carter estate, and casting harsh shadows across Jennifer's beautiful, twisted face. "You think he cares about you?" Jennifer laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You're a convenience, a servant. When he's gone, and believe me, that day is coming soon, you'll be out on the street where you belong." Sarah swallowed hard, but kept her chin up. She'd endured worse in her 24 years of life than the barbs of a bitter socialite. What truly frightened her wasn't Jennifer's words, but the cold calculation behind them. This wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. "Mrs. Smith, please," Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Mr. Robert needs rest." "The doctor said—" "I don't care what the doctor said," Jennifer snapped, stepping closer. "I'm the lady of this house, and you will do as I say." Outside, thunder crashed, as if nature itself was punctuating the confrontation unfolding within the mansion's walls. Neither woman noticed the shadow at the far end of the corridor, where John Smith stood frozen, witnessing a side of his wife he had never seen before. "I wish you were dead already so I could have all of this for myself," Jennifer Smith spat, her manicured hand gesturing wildly at the opulent surroundings of the Carter mansion. The words hung in the air like poison, seeming to freeze even the violent storm that raged outside the windows. Lightning flashed, illuminating the tableau of conflict in stark white light. The socialite's face contorted with naked greed, the elderly man's shock, and the maid's protective stance. Robert Smith's weathered face, already pale from illness, drained of its remaining color. Yet something flickered in his eyes, a spark of the military commander he had once been. With tremendous effort, he lifted his head from where it had been resting against Sarah Johnson's supporting arm. His frail body might be failing him, but his spirit remained unbroken. "You will not see that wish fulfilled," he rasped, each word clearly costing him precious energy. His voice, though barely above a whisper, carried the unmistakable weight of command that had once directed troops in battle. "I may be old, but I still have fight left in me." Sarah tightened her grip on the elderly patriarch, her dark eyes never leaving Jennifer. The young woman's body trembled slightly, but her stance remained firm as she positioned herself as a human shield between father and daughter-in-law. The contrast between her simple uniform and Jennifer's designer silk gown couldn't have been more stark. A visual representation of the power imbalance that Sarah was now boldly challenging. At the far end of the marble corridor, hidden in the shadows, John Smith stood frozen in disbelief. He had returned early from his business trip, expecting to find the peaceful home he'd left behind. Instead, he'd walked into a nightmare, his wife openly wishing death upon his father, while their loyal maid defended the old man with her own body. The billionaire heir felt his chest constrict as conflicting emotions battled within him. Disbelief that Jennifer, the woman he had married and trusted, could harbor such venom. Dread at what might have been happening in his absence. And something else, a creeping shame that it was Sarah, not himself, standing guard over his vulnerable father. Thunder crashed outside, as if nature itself were responding to the tension in the hallway. Jennifer's eyes narrowed dangerously as she took a step toward Robert and Sarah, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she raised her hand. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing within these walls, a tempest of betrayal, courage, and family secrets that threatened to tear apart everything John had ever known. Jennifer Smith's rage boiled over, her diamond-adorned fingers trembling around the crystal wine glass. In a flash of impulsive cruelty, she hurled the half-full glass of red wine directly at Robert Smith. The crimson liquid arced through the air, a deadly missile aimed at the elderly man's face. Without hesitation, Sarah Johnson flung her arm up, stepping into the line of fire. "No!" she cried, her body moving on instinct. The crystal struck her forearm with a sickening crack and shattered. Expensive wine and warm blood mingling as jagged shards bit deep into her skin. "Sarah!" Robert gasped, his weathered face contorting with horror as he reached for her with trembling hands. The retired army captain tried to rise from his chair, but his frailty betrayed him. Jennifer seized the moment, her silk gown rustling as she lunged forward. She grabbed Sarah by the injured arm, fingers digging cruelly into the fresh wounds. With surprising strength, she shoved the young woman against the marble wall of the mansion. Sarah's head struck the hard surface with a dull thud, stars exploding behind her eyes. "Please, Mrs. Smith," Sarah began, but her plea was cut short as Jennifer's hand cracked across her face, the socialite's diamond ring splitting her lip. "You dare defy me?" Jennifer shrieked, fury pouring out in each blow. Her perfectly manicured nails left red welts across Sarah's cheek as she struck again. "You're nothing but staff. Nothing." Blood trickled down Sarah's arm, staining the crisp, white uniform that marked her position in the household. She raised her hands defensively, unwilling to strike back at her employer's wife, but desperate to protect herself. "Stop this!" Robert commanded, his voice carrying the authority of his military past despite his physical weakness. "Leave her alone, Jennifer." The socialite whirled toward him, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor. "You don't give orders in this house anymore, old man," she spat, her beautiful face twisted with contempt. "This will all be mine soon enough." Sarah slumped against the wall, cradling her bleeding arm. Crystal fragments glinted in her dark skin, each breath sending fresh waves of pain through her body. Yet still she inched toward Robert, determined to place herself between him and the raging woman. Jennifer noticed the movement and turned back to Sarah, raising her hand for another strike. "Know your place," she hissed, eyes narrowed to venomous slits, "or I'll make sure you never work in this city again." The blood from Sarah's wounds dripped onto the pristine floor of the Carter mansion, each crimson droplet a testament to her unwavering loyalty to the elderly patriarch she had sworn to protect. Sarah Johnson's sobs echoed through the marble corridors of the Carter mansion, each cry bouncing off the cold surfaces like shattered glass. Her tears mingled with the blood trickling down her arm as she raised her hands defensively. "Please, ma'am, don't hurt me," she begged, her voice breaking. "He needs peace. Please stop." Her eyes darted to Robert Smith, who watched in horror, his frail body trembling with each blow that landed on his protector. Jennifer Smith's perfectly manicured nails dug into Sarah's skin as she grabbed her by the collar. The socialite's face contorted with rage, diamonds glittering at her throat like ice catching fire. "Pathetic girl," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you matter? You think he cares about you?" Another slap cracked across Sarah's cheek, the sound reverberating through the hallway. The young maid stumbled backward but remained standing, her body still positioned between Jennifer and the elderly patriarch. "You'll bleed for him," Jennifer continued, her silk gown swishing as she advanced again. "And still you'll lose. This house, this fortune is mine." She punctuated each word with a jab of her finger, her wedding ring catching the light from the chandelier above. Robert tried to rise from his chair, his weathered hands gripping the armrests. "Leave her alone," he commanded, but his voice, once strong enough to lead soldiers, now barely carried across the room. His attempt to stand sent him into a coughing fit, his face reddening with effort and distress. Sarah's eyes widened with concern for the old captain. "Sir, please don't strain yourself," she pleaded, momentarily forgetting her own pain. This brief distraction gave Jennifer the opening to strike again, her hand connecting with Sarah's already bruised face. The maid collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the marble floor as Jennifer loomed over her. "Know your place," the socialite hissed, raising her hand for another blow. At last, John Smith rushed in, unable to remain a silent witness any longer. The billionaire heir moved with purpose, crossing the corridor in 3 long strides. He grabbed his wife's wrist mid-air, halting her next strike with firm precision. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but commanding. Jennifer whirled to face him, surprise flashing across her features before quickly morphing into practiced innocence. Confusion clouded John's face as he looked from his wife to Sarah, then to his trembling father, each of them broken in different ways. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm raging outside. 4 people locked in a tableau of violence and betrayal, the truth hanging between them like an undetonated bomb. Jennifer Smith's demeanor shifted in an instant. Like a chameleon, she transformed from violent aggressor to wounded innocent, pressing herself against John's chest with practiced vulnerability. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she clutched at his tailored suit. "She attacked your father," Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "I caught her red-handed. Look at the blood." She pointed dramatically at the crimson stains on the marble floor. Her eyes, wide with desperation, sought John's gaze. "No, that's not true," Sarah pleaded, her voice breaking. "I was protecting him. Your wife. She threw the glass at your father. I blocked it." She winced as she shifted, pain shooting through her arm. "Please, you have to believe me." Robert tried to speak from his chair, his weathered face contorted with effort. But Jennifer quickly moved to his side, effectively silencing him with a gentle hand on his shoulder that looked caring but pressed with warning. "She's lying," Jennifer insisted, tears now forming in her eyes. "I would never hurt your father. You know how much I care for him." She looked up at her husband with practiced innocence, her manicured hand still firmly on the elderly man's shoulder. John Smith stood frozen between them, his jaw tightening as he processed the scene. The chaos, the blood, the fear for his father, all clouded his judgment. His gaze darted between his wife's tearful face and Sarah's bleeding arm, between his father's distressed expression and the shattered crystal on the floor. "Sir, please," Sarah whispered, taking another step forward. "Ask your father what happened. He saw everything." Jennifer's grip on Robert's shoulder tightened visibly. "She's manipulating you both. Can't you see?" John's expression hardened as he made his decision. His voice, heavy with authority, cut through Sarah's pleas. "Enough, Sarah. You've gone too far." The billionaire straightened his posture, assuming the commanding presence that had built his empire. "You're dismissed. Leave this house at once." The words hung in the air, heavier than the crystal that had shattered moments before. Sarah's face crumpled, her body seeming to fold in on itself. These words had wounded her more deeply than Jennifer's blows or the glass that had cut her skin. After years of loyal service, after protecting the man she had come to care for like family, she was being cast out. Behind John's back, Jennifer's lips curled into the faintest smile of triumph. Sarah Johnson's legs buckled beneath her as the weight of John Smith's words crushed her spirit. The dismissal echoed in her ears like a death sentence. Blood trickled down her arm where the crystal shards had embedded themselves in her skin, but the physical pain paled compared to the agony of injustice. "Sir, please, I beg you, I would never harm him," Sarah pleaded, her voice fracturing with each syllable. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the droplets of blood that fell to the polished marble floor. "He's like family to me." John stood rigid, his expression hardened by confusion and misplaced anger. He wouldn't meet her eyes as she stumbled backward, clutching her wounded arm. Sarah's sobs grew louder as she retreated, her uniform now stained with both wine and blood, evidence of her sacrifice rather than her guilt. "Mr. Smith, please," she whispered one final time before turning away. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her footsteps were unsteady as she made her way down the corridor, leaving behind a trail of teardrops and blood that marked her path like breadcrumbs of sorrow. The staff who witnessed her disgrace pressed themselves against the walls, averting their eyes. Some whispered among themselves, already spinning tales they'd share in the servants' quarters later. Sarah's cries echoed through the mansion's marble halls, a haunting melody of betrayal that seemed to seep into the very foundation of the Carter estate. Meanwhile, Jennifer wrapped herself around John, her body trembling with fabricated fear. She buried her face against his chest, her diamond earrings catching the light as she moved. "You did the right thing, darling," she murmured, her voice honeyed with deceit. She was dangerous. She fooled us all with that innocent act. Jennifer's fingers clutched at his shirt, her nails digging slightly into the expensive fabric. "I was so frightened when I saw what she was doing to your father." John nodded mechanically, but his eyes remained fixed on the corridor where Sarah had disappeared. The trail of blood glistened under the chandelier's light, and shards of crystal sparkled like accusatory stars against the dark marble. Something didn't align in the tableau before him. The broken glass, his father's distress, Sarah's desperate pleas. A shadow of doubt flickered across his face as he absently stroked his wife's back. The mansion fell into an uneasy silence, punctuated only by Robert's labored breathing and the distant sound of the front door closing as Sarah Johnson was cast out into the storm. In the servants' quarters, whispers filled the air like smoke, dividing the staff into camps of fear and envy. The news of Sarah Johnson's dismissal spread rapidly through the narrow corridors where the household staff lived, each retelling, twisting the truth further from reality. "I heard she actually struck Mr. Robert Smith," whispered Maria, one of the newer kitchen assistants, her voice hushed yet eager. Mrs. Smith caught her red-handed. Thomas, the elderly groundskeeper, who had served the family for 20 years, merely shook his head, eyes downcast. He had seen Jennifer Smith's cruelty before, but remained silent, his mortgage and grandchildren's education hanging in the balance of his continued employment. In the corner of the common room, Lucia, who had worked alongside Sarah for 3 years, wiped tears from her eyes. "That's not true," she murmured, but her protest was too soft to challenge the growing narrative. The rain pounded against the windows of the servants' wing, creating a rhythmic backdrop to their hushed conversations. Outside, lightning illuminated the sprawling grounds of the Carter estate in brief, harsh flashes. "You didn't see what I saw," said another maid, her voice trembling. "Sarah was protecting him. Mrs. Smith was the one who—" She stopped abruptly when several heads turned her way, warning in their eyes. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room until someone finally spoke. "If it could happen to her, it could happen to any of us," one young maid whispered to another, and the words clung to the darkness like a chill. No one disagreed. Sarah had been among the most trusted staff members, her dedication to Robert Smith beyond question. If she could be discarded so easily, what hope did any of them have? Through the thin walls, they could hear Sarah's muffled sobs as she packed her few belongings. No one dared to comfort her, not with Jennifer Smith's influence hanging over the household like a guillotine blade. Minutes later, they watched from various windows as Sarah left the mansion, her uniform still stained with blood, her few possessions stuffed into a weathered backpack. The storm outside matched the turmoil within as she disappeared down the long driveway. Shoulders hunched against the driving rain, the Carter estate, with its marble halls and crystal chandeliers, had transformed overnight from a place of employment to a battlefield of betrayal, fear, and injustice. The rain would eventually stop, but this storm, this poison of lies and power unchecked, would not easily pass. Behind closed doors, staff members locked away their true thoughts, knowing that tomorrow they would need to carry on as if nothing had happened, serving the family that had just demonstrated how disposable they all were. The heavy oak doors of the Carter mansion closed behind Sarah Johnson with a hollow thud that echoed through her chest. For the first time in 3 years, she stood on the outside looking in, her once pristine uniform now soaked through by the relentless Los Angeles rain. The blood from her lacerated arm burning colder than the night air against her skin. The mansion's windows glowed amber against the darkness, each light a reminder of the life she'd built and lost in minutes. Sarah clutched her wounded arm, wincing as raindrops mixed with tears on her face. The security cameras that lined the property's edge seemed to watch her departure with mechanical indifference. The same cameras that had captured the truth nobody inside would believe. "You're dismissed. Leave this house at once." John Smith's words replayed in her mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the glass shards Jennifer had driven into her flesh. 3 years of loyalty, of burly mornings and late nights, of knowing exactly how Robert liked his tea and which stories from his army days made him smile, all erased by a single moment of betrayal. Sarah stumbled down the winding driveway, her service shoes slipping on wet pavement. Behind her, the mansion stood like a fortress, its marble halls alive with whispers and lies. Ahead stretched only darkness. The long road slick with water and shadows, no streetlights to guide her way to the bus stop 2 miles down. She thought of her mother back in Detroit, dependent on the money Sarah sent each month for her medications. What would happen now? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through her body, making her gasp for air between sobs. A car approached from behind, headlights cutting through the rain, and Sarah pressed herself against the estate's stone wall, making herself small. The vehicle slowed, perhaps another staff member leaving for the night, but then accelerated past her, splashing dirty water across her already soaked uniform. "Stand tall, soldier," she whispered to herself, echoing Robert's words. The old captain had become more than an employer to her. He'd become family. And now she'd failed him, leaving him alone with Jennifer's cruelty and John's blindness. Sarah's fingers traced the Carter family emblem embroidered on her pocket, her final connection to the life behind those walls. With trembling hands, she tore it from the fabric, letting the rain wash away the blood that stained her palm. The emblem fell to the ground, disappearing into a puddle as Sarah Johnson continued her lonely walk into the darkness. Each step carrying her further from the only place she'd called home since coming to Los Angeles. Inside the mansion, John Smith stood frozen in the corridor, long after Sarah had gone, his pulse racing against his ribs like a trapped animal. The evidence of violence remained scattered across the marble floor, shards of crystal catching the light, droplets of blood marking a path toward the door. His father's trembling hand still reached toward the empty hallway where Sarah had disappeared, as if trying to call her back through sheer force of will. "She tried to hurt him, John," Jennifer insisted, clinging to his arm with manicured fingers. "I saved your father from that woman." Her voice dripped with practiced concern, but something in her tone rang hollow. The billionaire heir felt his stomach twist as he looked down at his wife's immaculate appearance, not a hair out of place, not a drop of blood on her silk gown. "I need time to think," he muttered, gently extracting himself from her grip. Jennifer's smile faltered for just a moment before she nodded, playing the role of the understanding spouse. "Of course, darling. I'll check on Robert while you process everything." Hours passed, the mansion growing quiet as night settled over Los Angeles. John paced in his study, replaying the scene in his mind. Something didn't add up. Sarah had been with them for 3 years, quiet, efficient, and seemingly devoted to his father. The elderly patriarch had always spoken highly of her, even as his health declined. While Jennifer finally retreated to their bedroom, John waited until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then he slipped out, moving silently through the darkened hallways toward the security office at the far end of the East Wing. "I need to see the footage from outside my father's room," he demanded of the night guard, a young man who straightened immediately at his employer's unexpected appearance. Yes, sir. What time frame? Everything from this evening, starting at 7. The guard pulled up the files, and John leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the desk. The security camera had captured everything in stark black and white. Jennifer's initial confrontation, Sarah's protective stance, the young maid deliberately placing herself between Robert and danger. Then came the thrown glass, the impact, the blood. Each blow Jennifer landed on Sarah's face and body. Not once did the maid strike back or abandon her position guarding the elderly man. John's breath caught in his throat as he watched Sarah endure without retaliation, her only movement being to shield his father more completely. The truth unfolded before him in irrefutable digital clarity. Sarah hadn't been the aggressor. She'd been the protector. "Play it again," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the equipment. His heart pounded against his chest as the footage confirmed what he now feared. He had made a terrible mistake. The first light of dawn filtered through the grand study's windows as John Smith stood rigid, the security footage still playing in his mind. He had spent the entire night reviewing the recordings, watching Sarah's bravery and Jennifer's cruelty unfold in stark black and white. Jennifer swept into the room in a silk robe, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her smile faltered when she saw the hard set of her husband's jaw. "I saw everything," John said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The cameras don't lie." Jennifer's face blanched for just a moment before her features hardened into defiance. She crossed the room, reaching for him. "Darling, you can't possibly believe." "Don't." He stepped back, putting the mahogany desk between them. "I watched you assault Sarah. I saw you throw that glass at my father." Jennifer's eyes narrowed, calculation replacing her feigned innocence. "That little nobody? She manipulated the situation. You'll ruin us both if you side with her." "You've already ruined yourself," John replied, ice coating every word. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a leather portfolio. "This marriage is over." The legal papers slid across the polished surface. Jennifer didn't touch them, her manicured nails digging into her palms instead. "An annulment?" she hissed, scanning the first page. "You can't be serious. Half of this fortune is mine." "Not anymore." John's voice remained steady. "My attorneys work through the night. Your prenuptial agreement had very specific clauses about misconduct toward family members." Jennifer's composure cracked. "You'll regret this. I made you who you are in this city." "No," John said simply. "You made me forget who I was." Within a week, Jennifer was gone from the Carter estate, her designer clothes and jewelry removed in sleek black suitcases. Her name had been methodically severed from every account, property deed, and investment portfolio associated with the Smith family fortune. The mansion felt lighter somehow, as if a shadow had been lifted from its marble halls. Robert sat in his favorite spot by the bay window, morning sunlight streaming across his lined face. His frail hands rested on the windowsill, but his eyes were clear as they followed the birds in the garden. John entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. His father didn't turn, but a small smile touched his lips. "She's gone?" Robert asked. "Yes, for good." The elderly man nodded slowly. "That girl, Sarah," he said, his weak voice glimmering with unexpected pride. "She stood like a soldier when it mattered. Didn't back down an inch." John set the coffee down, guilt washing over him anew. "I know, Dad." "Don't let her sacrifice be forgotten," Robert added, finally turning to meet his son's gaze. "People like that, they're worth more than all the money in our vaults." John Smith knelt beside his father's bed, the weight of guilt crushing his chest. The morning light cast long shadows across Robert's weathered face, highlighting every line earned through years of military service and fatherhood. The elderly man's breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes clear despite his physical frailty. "I wronged her, Dad," John confessed, his voice breaking. "I believed the wrong person. I let Jennifer manipulate me into dismissing the one person who truly protected you." Robert's hand, thin but still strong in spirit, rested gently on his son's shoulder. The retired Army captain's touch carried decades of wisdom and resilience. "Then make it right," he said simply, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded troops years ago. That evening, after making several calls to track her down, John found Sarah Johnson at a modest diner on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The establishment was nearly empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as she sat alone in a corner booth. Her wounds were still fresh, a bandage wrapped around her forearm where the crystal had cut her, and a fading bruise on her cheek from Jennifer's strikes. Sarah looked up as the bell above the door announced his arrival, her body tensing visibly. She wore civilian clothes now, not the uniform she'd worn for 3 years at the Carter estate. Though her spirit seemed battered, there was an undeniable dignity in her posture that hadn't been defeated. John slid into the booth across from her, removing his expensive jacket and placing it beside him. For a moment, the billionaire air couldn't meet her eyes, shame coloring his features. "I saw the footage," he finally said, his voice thick with remorse. "The security cameras captured everything. I know the truth now. You didn't harm my father. You saved him. You shielded him with your own body." Tears welled in Sarah's dark eyes as she whispered, "You believe me?" The question hung between them, laden with all she had endured. John nodded, finally looking directly at her. "I do. I'm ashamed I didn't believe you when it mattered most. I let Jennifer's lies cloud my judgment, and you paid the price." His hands, manicured and unmarked by labor, rested on the table between them, a stark contrast to Sarah's, which bore small scars from years of service. The distance between their worlds seemed both vast and suddenly bridgeable in that fluorescent-lit diner. "My father misses you," John added softly. "He keeps asking for the soldier who stood guard for him." John Smith slid a cream-colored envelope across the diner table, his fingers lingering on its edge. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows on his face, highlighting the guilt etched into every line. "Open it," he said softly. Sarah Johnson's trembling fingers reached for the envelope. Her arm still bore the marks from Jennifer's attack, fading purple bruises that told a story of loyalty and sacrifice. Inside, she found a contract, not for a maid, but for a personal caregiver to Robert Smith. The salary figure made her breath catch. "This can't be right," she whispered, looking up at John with disbelief. "It is," he assured her, "and there's more. Full medical benefits for you and your mother in Detroit." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. For 3 years, she'd been sending half her paycheck to her mother, whose medical bills had been mounting since her diabetes diagnosis. Every extra shift, every holiday worked, all to keep her mother's treatments going. "I know about your mother's condition," John continued, his voice gentle but firm. "My father told me how you'd work double shifts to send money home. I should have noticed myself." The diner's ambient noise faded as Sarah stared at the document, her vision blurring. This wasn't charity. It was validation, recognition of her worth that Jennifer had tried to strip away. "Why?" she managed to ask. John leaned forward, his expensive suit at odds with the worn vinyl booth. "Because you stood for my father when I didn't. Because you bled for him." His voice cracked slightly. "Because I was wrong, and this is the least I can do to make it right." Sarah ran her finger over the contract's edge, feeling the weight of the moment. This piece of paper represented more than employment. It was dignity, security, and redemption all at once. "Say yes," John urged, his eyes earnest. "Come back. Help me give my father the dignity he deserves, and let me help your mother. It's the least I can do." Sarah closed her eyes, memories flooding back. Robert's gentle encouragement, his military stories, the way he'd called her soldier. When she'd stood between him and Jennifer's rage, she thought of her mother, who had sacrificed everything for her education. She nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek. Yes, she whispered. John's shoulders relaxed visibly. He reached across the table, not to shake her hand, but to squeeze it gently in gratitude. Thank you, he said. And for the first time in months, hope returned to the Carter name. Back at the mansion, whispers rippled through the staff like electricity through copper wire. The truth had begun to spread. Jennifer's cruelty, Sarah's courage, John's reversal. In the kitchen, two housekeepers exchanged knowing glances as Sarah Johnson passed by. The younger staff members who had once envied her position now watched with newfound respect, while others, still clinging to Jennifer's version of events, sneered behind cupped hands. She stood up to Mrs. Smith, whispered one of the gardeners during lunch break. Would any of us have done the same? The marble halls that had once felt like a prison to Sarah now opened before her with new possibility. She walked not as a disgraced servant, but as a woman who had faced injustice and remained standing. The bruises on her face were fading, but the memory of that night remained etched in everyone's minds, especially those who had heard Sarah's cries echoing through the corridors. Martha, the head housekeeper, who had worked for the Smith family for 20 years, stopped Sarah in the East Wing. "You've got more courage than most," she said quietly, pressing a small jar of homemade salve into Sarah's palm. "For your arm, my grandmother's recipe." Sarah nodded gratefully, her throat tight with emotion. The simple gesture meant more than Martha could know. A small alliance in a house still divided by loyalty and fear. That evening, Sarah carried a tray of chamomile tea into Robert's bedroom, the fragrant steam rising between them as she set it on his nightstand. The elderly man looked smaller against the pillows, but his eyes brightened when she entered. She adjusted his blanket with gentle care, tucking it around his thin shoulders. "Welcome home, soldier," he murmured, his weathered hand reaching for hers. His grip was warm, stronger than it had been in days. "I'm here, sir. I'm not leaving your side," she replied, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. The light from the bedside lamp caught the moisture, turning it to gold. Robert's gaze drifted to the window, where Los Angeles sprawled beneath them, a carpet of twinkling lights. "Jennifer always hated this view," he said softly. Said it reminded her there was a world beyond her control. Sarah followed his gaze, seeing not just the city, but the future stretching before them, uncertain but full of possibility. The Carter estate had been a battleground, but now, in this quiet moment between an old soldier and the woman who had defended him, it felt like the beginning of peace. The mansion was quieter now, its marble halls cleansed of Jennifer's shadow, the heavy silence replaced by fragile beginnings of healing. Sarah Johnson's new quarters were no longer in the cramped servant wing, but in a small suite adjacent to Robert's room. The space, filled with light and dignity, was a world away from the broom closet she once called home. Morning sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains as Sarah arranged fresh flowers beside Robert's bed. The elderly man watched her with clear eyes, more alert than he'd been in weeks. His weathered hands, still bearing the calluses of his military days, rested atop the quilt Sarah had brought from her mother's home in Detroit. "You came back," Robert said, a smile wrinkling his weathered face. "I promised I wouldn't leave your side," she answered, settling into the chair beside him. Their bond, forged in the fire of betrayal, was stronger than ever. Sarah checked his medication chart, organizing the morning pills with practiced efficiency. The bruises on her arm were fading to yellow, physical reminders of that terrible night, gradually healing just as the emotional wounds were beginning to close. "John tells me your mother's treatments are going well," Robert remarked, swallowing his medicine with a small sip of water. Sarah nodded, her eyes brightening. "The specialists in Detroit say she's responding to the new therapy. I spoke with her last night on my smartphone. She sends her thanks to you both." Robert waved away the gratitude with a gentle gesture. Family takes care of family. The word hung in the air between them. Family. no longer separated by the rigid lines of employer and employee. Sarah adjusted his pillows, remembering how she'd once feared even making eye contact with the mansion's residents. Now, she moved through these rooms with purpose. Her new position giving her not just better quarters, but a sense of belonging she'd never expected to find. Outside the window, gardeners tended the estate grounds, their voices drifting up in muted conversation. Inside, the house staff moved with renewed purpose, the toxic atmosphere dissipating with Jennifer's departure. "The doctor will be here at 2, Sarah reminded him, checking her watch. "And I've arranged for tea in the sunroom afterward, if you're feeling up to it." Robert reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You know, in the Army, we learned to recognize true courage. It's not about being fearless. It's about doing what's right despite your fear." His eyes, faded blue but sharp with memory, held hers. "What you did that night, that was courage, soldier." Sarah squeezed his hand gently, emotion tightening her throat. In this quiet room, with Los Angeles sprawling beyond the windows, they had created something rare and precious from the wreckage of cruelty: trust, respect, and healing. John Smith called a staff meeting in the grand study, his posture rigid as he addressed the 23 household employees gathered before him. The morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor as he cleared his throat. "I want to make something perfectly clear," he announced, his voice carrying the authority that had built his billion-dollar empire. "Sarah Johnson is no longer just an employee here. She's family." His eyes swept across the room, noting which staff member shifted uncomfortably. "If anyone gives her trouble, they answer directly to me." The warning hung in the air, unmistakable in its intent. The household manager nodded solemnly, while several maids exchanged glances. John continued, "What happened here was unacceptable. My father's well-being is my priority, and Sarah has proven herself essential to that goal." As the meeting dispersed, whispers followed in its wake. The head chef muttered to the groundskeeper, "Quite the promotion from scrubbing toilets." But the elderly gardener who had served the family for decades silenced him with a stern look. Sarah walked the mansion's corridors with newfound confidence that afternoon, clipboard in hand, containing Robert's detailed schedule. Medication times, physical therapy appointments, meal plans tailored to his dietary needs. Her arms still bore the fading marks from Jennifer's attack, but she carried herself with dignity. 2 housemaids huddled near the kitchen entrance as she passed. "Think she's after the old man's money?" one whispered, but fell silent when the head housekeeper approached. "That girl stood between Mr. Robert and harm," the housekeeper said firmly. "I saw the security footage. She took those blows without raising a hand to defend herself. Show some respect." Others in the staff had begun to rally around Sarah. The chef's assistant prepared Robert's favorite soup with extra care, and the laundry supervisor personally pressed Sarah's new caregiver uniforms. No longer the standard black and white maid's attire, but professional attire befitting her elevated position. Later that day, Sarah wheeled Robert into the garden for his afternoon sun. A young groundskeeper rushed to assist with the wheelchair ramp, smiling warmly. "My grandfather was in the Army too, sir," he told Robert. "It's an honor to serve you both." Robert's weathered face brightened as he replied, "Then you understand what loyalty means, young man." The mansion was changing, its invisible hierarchies shifting. Though pockets of resentment remained, a new respect was taking root, not just for Sarah's position, but for her courage on that stormy night when she had bled for a man who valued her humanity when others would not. The afternoon sun bathed the sunroom in golden light as Sarah Johnson wheeled Robert Smith through the wide doorway. The space was a sanctuary of sorts, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the manicured gardens of the Carter estate. Birds flitted between branches outside, oblivious to the human drama that had unfolded within these walls. "Just here is perfect," Robert said, pointing to a spot where the sunlight warmed the polished hardwood floor. Sarah positioned his wheelchair carefully, then draped a light blanket over his knees despite the warmth. Old habits from her days as a maid remained, though her role had evolved significantly. "Tea, sir?" she asked, already moving toward the silver service that had been prepared on a nearby table. Robert nodded, his weathered hands resting on the armrests of his wheelchair. As Sarah poured the steaming liquid into fine china cups, the elderly man observed her with eyes that missed nothing. The bruises on her face had faded, but the emotional wounds were still healing for both of them. "You'll need thick skin, soldier," Robert said suddenly, his voice carrying the authority of his military past. His eyes sharpened as he accepted the tea from her. "These halls echo with more than footsteps. They carry envy, fear, ambition. Jennifer knew how to twist that. Others will try, too." Sarah settled into the chair beside him, her own cup balanced delicately in her hands. Outside, the Los Angeles skyline shimmered in the distance, a world away from the intimate conversation unfolding in the sunroom. "The staff talks," he continued. "Some resent your new position. The way John defended you. Your suite near mine." He sipped his tea, wincing slightly at its heat. "My daughter-in-law may be gone, but her poison lingers." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm not afraid, sir. I know why I'm here. For you." She straightened her shoulders, a gesture reminiscent of his military bearing. "Let them talk. Words can't hurt me now." The corners of Robert's mouth lifted in a faint smile full of pride. His hand, spotted with age but still strong, reached for hers. "Remember, loyalty is a shield stronger than steel." The moment stretched between them, comfortable and understanding. Sarah had stood between this man and harm once before. She would do it again without hesitation. "Now," Robert said, his tone lightening as he released her hand, "tell me about your mother. John mentioned her treatments have begun?" Sarah nodded, grateful for the change of subject. As they talked, the sunlight shifted across the floor, casting long shadows that reached toward the door, where, unnoticed by either of them, a member of the household staff paused briefly before continuing down the hall, carrying whispers that would soon spread through the mansion. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of John Smith's office as he summoned Sarah Johnson. She entered with hesitation, her steps still carrying the memory of that terrible night. The office, with its mahogany desk and leather chairs, felt worlds apart from the servant quarters she'd once called home. "Please sit down," John said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice had lost the sharp edge of authority she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, there was something softer there. Respect, perhaps even remorse. Sarah perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded in her lap. The billionaire heir opened a drawer and removed a manila envelope, sliding it across the polished surface between them. "Your mother's medical bills. Consider them covered. It's not charity. It's repayment for what you've done for my father and for me." Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for the document. Opening it carefully, she scanned the contents, comprehensive coverage for her mother's treatments in Detroit, hospital stays, medications, even home care. The figures blurred as tears welled in her eyes. "This is," she began, but words failed her. For 3 years, she'd sent most of her salary home, stretching every dollar, making impossible choices between necessities. Now, with a single gesture, John had lifted that crushing weight. "You don't have to thank me," he said earnestly, leaning forward. "Just keep doing what you've always done. Stand by my father. That's thanks enough." The sunlight caught the moisture in Sarah's eyes as she nodded. "I will. I promise." Her voice came thick with emotion, barely above a whisper. John stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I misjudged you," he admitted. "When it mattered most, I failed to see what was right in front of me." Sarah clutched the envelope to her chest, feeling its life-changing weight. "We all make mistakes, sir." "Some mistakes cost more than others," he replied, turning back to face her. Jennifer would have destroyed everything my father built, not just his fortune, but his legacy of integrity. The young woman rose from her chair, standing taller than she had in weeks. Your father told me once that true wealth isn't what you have, but who stands beside you when you have nothing. A smile, small but genuine, crossed John's face. He always did have a way with words. He extended his hand, not as an employer to a servant, but as one equal to another. Thank you, Sarah. She took his hand, the simple gesture sealing a new understanding between them. As she left the office, the envelope secure in her grasp, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since entering the Carter mansion: dignity. That evening, Sarah Johnson sat by Robert Smith's bed as he drifted into sleep, his weathered face finally at peace. The soft glow of the bedside lamp illuminated the folded American flag on his nightstand, a testament to his years as an Army captain, and now a symbol of the battle they had both survived within these marble walls. The flag's crisp edges and stars reminded her of dignity preserved against all odds. Sarah gently adjusted his blanket, careful not to wake him. His breathing had steadied in recent days, no longer labored with stress and fear. She moved quietly to the window and cracked it open, letting in the scent of rain-soaked earth from the manicured gardens below. The Los Angeles skyline twinkled in the distance, a constellation of lights against the night sky. The fresh air carried away the lingering sense of medicine and age, replacing them with the promise of renewal. It reminded her that storms, both literal and those of human making, could pass, leaving something new in their wake. The mansion felt different now. Without Jennifer's venomous presence, the hall seemed to breathe easier. Sarah touched the healing wound on her arm, the scar a permanent reminder of her choice to stand between cruelty and vulnerability. The pain had subsided, but the memory remained sharp, crystal shattering, wine mixing with blood, and the moment when loyalty outweighed fear. I will not break. Not here, not now, she whispered into the quiet room, her words a promise to herself and to the sleeping man, who had called her soldier when she needed strength most. The title had become a badge of honor between them, a recognition that some battles were fought not on distant fields, but in quiet corridors, where only character determined the victor. For the first time in days, Sarah felt the beginnings of belonging, not in the mansion's grandeur, with its chandeliers and marble floors, but in the bond she had forged with Robert, and in the cautious trust of a billionaire who had finally seen the truth. John's words from earlier echoed in her mind. Just keep doing what you've always done. Stand by my father. She closed her eyes, thinking of her mother in Detroit, who would now receive the medical care she desperately needed. One act of courage had created ripples that changed everything. Sarah settled back into the chair beside Robert's bed, watching over him as the night deepened. Rest well, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in this quiet moment of vigilance and care, she had found her place. Outside, Los Angeles glowed in the night, a city of endless stories and second chances. Inside the Carter estate, the rhythm of life returned, but beneath its polished surface, Sarah knew battles still lay ahead, battles of loyalty, justice, and dignity. Sarah Johnson tightened the bandage on her healing arm, wincing slightly at the memory of shattering crystal and Jennifer's rage. The wound was healing, much like the household itself, slowly, imperfectly, but with promise. Through her window, she could see the sprawling city lights, each one representing a life as complex as her own. Ready for tomorrow's therapy session? John Smith asked, appearing in her doorway. His posture had changed since Jennifer's departure. Shoulders less burdened, eyes clearer. Yes, sir. Your father's looking forward to it, she replied, smoothing her uniform. The doctor says he's making progress. John nodded, hesitating before adding, I spoke with the hospital in Detroit. Your mother's treatment is proceeding well." His voice softened. "You don't have to worry about her anymore." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Thank you," she whispered. After John left, Sarah made her evening rounds. The mansion felt different now. Still grand with its marble halls and crystal chandeliers, but somehow more human. Some staff members nodded respectfully as she passed. Others averted their eyes, loyalty to Jennifer still lingering in their silence. In Robert's room, the elderly man slept peacefully, the folded flag from his army days catching moonlight on his nightstand. Sarah adjusted his blanket, remembering his words. "Loyalty is a shield stronger than steel." She touched the flag gently. "I won't let you down, Captain," she murmured. Later, alone in her suite, Sarah opened her smartphone, checking the message from her mother. A photo of her smiling from her hospital bed, stronger than she'd looked in months. Progress. Hope. Sarah moved to the window, watching as fog rolled in from the Pacific, shrouding the mansion grounds. Jennifer might be gone, but her influence remained in whispers, in sideways glances, in the invisible lines drawn between those who accepted Sarah's new position and those who resented it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The family lawyer would arrive to finalize changes to Robert's care directives. The staff would continue watching, judging. The wounds, both physical and emotional, would need time to fully heal. But for tonight, in this moment of quiet, Sarah Johnson stood tall. She had protected a good man when it mattered most. She had endured cruelty and emerged stronger. She had proven her worth not through submission, but through courage. The young woman who had once been just a maid straightened her shoulders and faced her reflection in the window. Whatever battles came next, she was ready.